Hi. Hi, and welcome to another episode of Ask Ira Live. You might notice something's a little different. It's just me in studio today as Ira is in Milwaukee, but we'll be chatting a little bit back and forth. A lot to go over, namely Tyler Johnson. He went out in the game against the Bulls the other day. So, Ira, what can you tell us about Tyler Johnson's injury?
Well, first, EmmaKate, you are in a far better place than I am here in Milwaukee. Woke up today, 9 degrees, -3, wind chill factor. So enjoy the warmth back in South Florida. And what I can tell you is it's good news for Tyler Johnson. I just got back from shoot-around at the Bradley Center. I originally thought with that sprained ankle that he suffered in the second half Monday in Chicago that he might be out for weeks. Typically, like with Dion Waiters, we've been talking about in recent weeks. Instead, Tyler said it's an Achilles and ankle sprain, but it's not the knee. There's no need for an MRI. And his belief is this, that it'll only be a matter of days and games and not weeks. So I think when you look back at what happened and how long he stayed on the court at the United Center, I know it's not good news, but I guess I would phrase it this way. It's the best possible news.
All right, so again, the Heat have been plagued by injuries all season. It's been a kind of matter of next man up this whole time. So who's going to step up and fill his spot in the starting lineup?
Well, you know Eric Spoelstra, one thing, he will not tell anyone day to day, hour to hour, game to game. What I think you're going to see is a little more Derrick Jones Jr., a name we'll get to a little later in the show, on a two-way contract, came from the Phoenix Suns. They signed him away. I think he'll get a little more action. Eric Spoelstra said at shoot-around on Wednesday that his preference is not to start Wayne Ellington, another name we'll talk about later in the show, because he's been so effective off the bench. What I'm curious about, EmmaKate, is this. Will we see more Justice Winslow? Look, the timing for an injury is never perfect. But if we wind up in a situation where with Justice back and with Tyler Johnson out, maybe this is the time now we can see Justice Winslow get his legs after missing those 14 games with that knee strain.
Mm-hmm. So since we last talked, the Heat have won one, lost one. They won in Milwaukee, or won here against Milwaukee, and then lost in Chicago. So Chicago's not doing so well this season. Is there any cause for concern considering that loss, or I think we're still doing okay?
You know, I think I would look at it this way. Chicago's overall record is a lottery record, but in the last 2-3 weeks, they've been playing, honestly, as good as anyone in the Eastern Conference, maybe outside of Boston, Toronto, and I'm not even sure Cleveland right now. They're hitting their three ball. They're getting their stride. Zach LaVine is back for them. They're a different team right now. Look, that was the second day of a back-to-back for the Heat. Chicago was off on Monday. I think you chalk that up to the schedule. You just try to regain your legs. That was the start of a 5-game trip. There was no shame in losing to the Bulls these days. They've beaten some quality opponents. The fact for the Heat now is to make that strides that they've made, that 7-game winning streak is over. I'm curious how they'll deal with adversity, because they really haven't had adversity in this calendar year when it comes to the one-loss record.
Absolutely. And like we mentioned, the Heat are in Milwaukee. We'll be playing tonight against the Bucks, and we'll have more for you next time. But barring any technical difficulties, we're going to come back at the end of the show to answer some more of your questions live. As for now, before Ira left for Milwaukee, he and I sat down and talked about a few hot topics, so here's that right now. Hello and welcome to another episode of Ask Ira Live, although we might not exactly be live. Before Ira heads off to Milwaukee, we're going to sit down and talk about some big hot topics for the Heat. And we're going to get started off. There's one player who's been, maybe you want to call him a three-point savant this season, Wayne Ellington.
Yeah, you know, and the thing is, EmmaKate, when you look at this Heat season and you say, what are the biggest surprises? Well, we know there have been disappointment, the Dion Waiters ankle injury not being there for his teammates. There have been ups and downs, Hassan Whiteside playing a lot of minutes, a little minutes, power rotation, not so much. And yet the consistency we've seen from one player. If you would have asked me, Ira, in training camp at the start of the season, is Wayne Ellington going to be a leading man for the Heat? I would have said to you, have you seen his career? He has been everywhere and anywhere, barely staying in the same place more than one season, had a ton of coaches, and then he found his special place. And what he has done this season for the Heat, it's almost condescending when you call a player a three-point specialist, as if that's all he does. Wayne has also rebounded. Remember the big driving layup at the end of the game against Toronto? He has done so much for this team, but the three-point shooting has changed everything. You could see it on almost every play the Heat run. There were 2, 4, 6 eyes on Wayne Ellington. What's he going to do? Where's he going to shoot? Where's Wayne? I mean, it's like almost one of those kids' puzzles. You got to find Wayne at all time. You got to see where he is. And if you just look at this graphic here of some of his accomplishments this season and what Wayne has achieved, you're talking about the most three-pointers by any NBA reserve. No player comes off the bench and is much as lethal from three as Wayne is. Yes, he does other things, but he shoots three-pointers, running roughly right now at 80% plus of his shots are three-pointers, so you know where you can find him if you're sitting there at the arena looking for him. And through the first 100 Heat games, his first 100 games with the Heat, no Heat player has made more three-pointers. Tim Hardaway had that record. It was obliterated by Wayne Ellington. He had that streak of three-pointers early, but you know what? Just getting one in a game now. You look at Wayne and you're going, well, that's not too good of a game you had. You expect almost 2, 3, 4 a game. He has been that dynamic. I cannot recall another Heat three-point specialist who has been as meaningful to the team's success as Wayne Ellington.
Well, I was actually at the game against the Timberwolves in Minneapolis. It was just raining threes, and Wayne was 6 for 9 from three-point range. Like, that's amazing.
And the volume. And again, this is the Miami Heat. Okay, so we spoke about this in our last show, the all-time great Heat centers. This has always been a physical, get the ball inside, play out of the paint team. And then all of a sudden you have a game recently, Wayne took 16 three-pointers. And what did Erik Spoelstra say after the game? And like, we basically checked Erik to see what was going on there. He says, I'd like to see Wayne take 20. And then I'd like to see him take 25. The Heat know what they have. They know the NBA is changing. They know they have this unique talent. As Erik Spoelstra said, there are no bad three-pointers from Wayne Ellington. And you go back to that Indiana game. Shot clock running down. The Heat in the final 30 seconds, only up by 3. Wayne Ellington, the original score sheet said 31 feet. It was updated to 28 feet. Still pretty far.
Yeah, that's all right.
Bounces it off the rim, bounces it in. Every Wayne Ellington three-point attempt is a good look because he's Wayne Ellington.
Absolutely. But he's going to be a free agent in July. So can the Heat afford to keep him next season?
You had to ruin it for everybody, didn't you?
I'm sorry. Just looking ahead.
It's on her. It's on her, everyone. Yes. He is a free agent after the season. Remember, the Heat had an option for this past season to bring him back for the season, about $6.3 million. They originally did not have the money to do that when they brought in James Johnson, Kelly Olynyk, and Dion Waiters' new contract. So they literally sold off Josh McRoberts. They sent Josh McRoberts and $5 million and a second-round pick just to create that cap space. That's how much Wayne means to this team. That got him here this year. Next year, he's going to be a restricted free agent in the summer. Salary can start at about $10 million, $11 million. Well, any other year for Wayne Ellington, you'd say, well, that seems about reasonable. That's above the average salary. But he's so far above the curve that it would not surprise me if another team comes out and says, we'll give you 14, we'll give you 15, we'll trump their offer. And Wayne has told me, I want to stay here. I love it here. He has his son. He's settled down here. He finally has a place he can call home. I think any reasonable Heat offer does it, but it's surprising because if you would have told me, well, Wayne made $6 million this year, I'd say he'll come back for about the same money. Everything has changed right now, and I don't think the Heat will let this guy go. I don't think they can afford to, EmmaKate.
He needs to stay. And you touched on this a little bit earlier, but is just calling him a three-point specialist selling him short?
And that's the thing. You look at his other numbers this year, and you look at his rebounding, and you look at the passing he's done, and you've looked even at the defense. Look, he is not a good defender. And he's the kind of player, when he's on the floor, the other team almost always runs their sets to go at him, and I understand that. But here's the trade-off, and it's simple. It's the kind of math even I can understand. I don't have a graduate degree, but I can understand that. If Wayne scores 3 on his shots and the other guy scores 2 on his shots, I believe that he'd come out at a net advantage. And that's what it's been. That's why no one beats the Warriors, because you're busting to get 2-point baskets. Steph Curry, Klay Thompson come down with a 3. That's what Wayne Ellington does. Wayne Ellington might give up a layup because of defense on one end, but if he gets you a 3 on the other end, you come out ahead of the game. This is the NBA's new math. You don't win in today's NBA scoring 2 at a time.
Oh, no, especially not in Steph Curry's league these days.
Yes.
So Ellington done enough to assure himself of rotation minutes moving forward?
Well, obviously the Dion Waiters, we know about his ankle and what's going on there, so that opened the minutes that weren't there at the start of the season. We know Josh Richardson, Tyler Johnson have been playing well, obviously. Rodney McGruder and his return, he's going to cut into that. Where at one point I would have felt that Wayne was just a specialist, that when Erik Spoelstra needed a little burst of energy, I think we're too far down this road. He has done too much for this team right now for Erik Spoelstra to pull back. Now, maybe there's an injury. Maybe something happens in the interim. That's always possible. But for the first time in Wayne Ellington's career, coming out of North Carolina and all the teams he's been through, I can even mention them all right here, I think for the first time you could say Wayne Ellington is an NBA rotation player.
Absolutely. All right, and although we aren't live, we are definitely going to get to your questions from the mailbag. So Adrian in Pembroke Pines asks, what should be the goal for the second half of the season?
You know, it's changed. Originally, if you would have asked me before the Heat's hot streak and the way they had that 6-game winning streak and took it into the weekend against Milwaukee, I would have said, look, you just want to get into the playoffs. After last season's disappointment, finishing 41-41, and all of a sudden you lost to a tiebreaker to the Bulls, just get in, I think the whole dynamic has changed. There's not a team in the Eastern Conference outside of Cleveland that I don't believe that he can compete with in a first-round series. I mean, you look at the success this year. They go into Boston, they win up there, they win the season series 2-1. That season series is done. You look against Washington, they've won a game against them already. They can compete against them. That recent game up in Toronto when they get Wayne Ellington's drive at the end and win that game. So I think they can compete with anyone outside of Cleveland. I think Cleveland hasn't sort of injected, playoff mode then. They're a different team. You'd love to see the Heat get to 4 or 5. You'd love to see them not wind up with a Boston, Toronto, or Cleveland. But also if they can get to number 4 and have home court, I think that would be special for South Florida. This town needs playoffs. No Dolphins, no Marlins. The Panthers have been up and down. I think for the Heat to open a playoff series at home, not return home necessarily down 2-0, would make all the difference. I think all of a sudden, after the strong first half of the season the team has had, I think home court in the first round is realistic, and I think it has to be the goal.
Absolutely. But is it realistic to expect or hope for another 30-11 finish to the season?
Now, I think what happened last year was everyone overlooking the Heat as, this god-awful team is coming to town. Look at their record. They're a bunch of losers. They don't have a winning record since the very beginning of the season, actually not even then. So when you look at it then, I think teams took them lightly. I am seeing more and more when I go on the road, the respect from opposing coaches and how they are game planning against the Heat and how all of a sudden they are saying, we know they can do this, this, and this. We know their dribble drive game. We know they're going to kick it out. We know they can make three-pointers. Opponents are scouting the Heat at a much higher level. But that's not saying they're going to go 30-11, but yeah, there's an expectation over the second half of the season. When you get a Rodney McGruder back, when you get more settled in your rotation, when guys like James Johnson and Kelly Olynyk find their places, there's no reason not to have a winning record, not to build on the 7 games over 500 midseason. So yeah, all of a sudden, where I predicted for the Heat maybe 42 wins, I think 45, 46, 47, not only within the realm, maybe should even be expected.
Yeah, let's hope they make that a goal. All right, Victor says Derrick Jones Jr. is a keeper. What a find by the Heat.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about these two-way contracts. They let you explore players. All of a sudden, Derrick Jones Jr., he was with the Suns at the start of the season. They cut him because they wanted to sign Mike James to a standard contract. He went to the G League, played for Phoenix's G League team. All of a sudden, the Heat said, you know what, Matt Williams, for what you've done for three-pointers, we need a more dynamic, complete wing. And they bring Derrick Jones Jr. in. Not only is he a dunker, remember he competed in the slam dunk contest last year, lost to Glenn Robinson Jr., but he's shown that he can make three-pointers, that he can be a defender. I expect him to get converted from his two-way contract to a standard NBA deal, and you look at all the Heat's developmental guys, Tyler Johnson, guys like that they brought in, who you said, who is that guy? I think Derrick Jones, a year from now, we're going to be talking about, wow, that was a heck of a find, and that's going to offset any of the contracts we're debating. So when we say, but what about that terrible Dion Waiters deal, for example, or something like that, you know what? All this stuff averages together. So if you're getting great minimal players, Rodney McGruder, Derrick Jones Jr., you can survive the contracts that don't work out. The Heat, the way they have found these guys and mined them and developed them, I think Derrick Jones Jr. could be that next guy.
Yeah. All right. Douglas asks, what happened to James Johnson? Will happen and will happen again. He's an enforcer. Enforcers are what they are. He will probably think twice, but it's a reaction.
Yeah, and the thing is about James Johnson, we spoke about it on last week's show also, the incident in Toronto and his overall physical play, that's who you want him to be. You want to have a guy like that on the court. And EmmaKate, I would put it this way. If Udonis Haslem was playing, you could say, okay, he's your enforcer. You know, he's the OG. He's the guy that everyone lines up behind. But he's not playing. And James Johnson has shown that he's the guy, don't mess with my guys. Don't knock down Wayne Ellington or Goran Dragic on their three-pointers. I'll be back at you. I like that. Look, I'm not an advocate of hockey fighting. I know you have a hockey background. You've covered a lot of hockey in the day. But EmmaKate, you know, just having the presence of a potential enforcer on the surface for your team makes a difference. I think that's what James Johnson is. I think James Johnson can be that guy where maybe someone thinks about something and they go, oh yeah, we got number 16 over there who's 7-0 career and lifetime MMA fights. Maybe we'll go in a different direction.
Yeah, that MMA fighting would definitely scare me off
Throw
a
him
little
off
bit.
a little bit, yeah. So they have their enforcer, I think, in James Johnson.
All right, so we're going to switch gears here, and every week we've been taking a look back at the best of the Heat. We're celebrating their 30th season, and every week, like we said, Ira is giving us his top 10 list. So this week, we're going to take a look at the top 10 sixth men for the Miami Heat.
Yeah, you know what? We've been doing the elite players. We've been gone through all 5 positions already. You can find those photo galleries at sunsentinel.com. But I think it's the unsung guys. It's the guys who've come in and made that little bit of a difference. Just like when we talk about Wayne Ellington at the top of the show, those guys could be just as influential. So I put together my list of top 10 sixth men. These are not necessarily the best players to come off the bench, but more a mix of guys who mostly came off the bench during their Heat careers. So if we go to the graphic, we'll throw up the first 3 names, counting backwards for the suspense. As usual, we've got Bimbo Coles at number 10. Early member of the Heat, wound up starting a little bit later, came out of Virginia Tech, really provided the energy. Number 9, we spoke about a couple of weeks ago, Eddie House and his three-pointers. Pat Riley's daughter saying to her dad when he was coaching, free Eddie House, get him out there, have him shooting those three-pointers. He did. He was the kind of guy who really, that's what this list is about, the quintessential energy guy off the bench. And look at number 8. He's been starting recently because of Dion Waiters' injury. But Tyler Johnson, through his first 3 seasons with the Heat, Eric Spoelstra would do anything and everything to keep him from starting because of the boost that he would provide off the bench. And I believe eventually you could see him possibly going back to a bench role.
Yeah, I mean, in 73 bench appearances last season, his scoring average was 13.7, and he was just great in that role.
Yeah, and I think it really was tough on Eric Spoelstra when Dion Waiters first went down to start Tyler. He looked at every other option he could and just said, you know what? Our Heat motto is next man up, and right now Tyler Johnson was the next man up. Even though his contract goes from about $6 million this year to $19 million next year, I think that he would prefer to have a highly paid backup guy to infuse that energy in there, literally to stick his face in there. We've spoken about his missing teeth over the years. That's who he is, that this guy will stand up to the challenge. He can be someone who changes the energy, and that's why when I put this list together, I said, what guy, when he comes into a game, does the flow change? Does the energy change? Do you notice he's in there? There's plenty of reserves that come off the Heat bench, and you look at out on the court and you realize, wow, he's been out there for 5 minutes already. When Tyler Johnson is out there, you know he's out there because usually he's out there picking up a missing tooth. But that's another story. So we'll move on in our list. And speaking about sort of bench boosts and guys who make a difference, one guy you always knew who was out there just by appearances was Chris Birdman Anderson and just what he would do. And you know what? If you can block a shot and flap your wings on the way down the court, you know the guy's out there.
Oh, yeah.
Another guy started a lot of his Heat career, but really became a guy toward the later stages who added that extra element of toughness there, like we spoke about with James Johnson, and that's Udonis Haslem. And UD, to make it such a hard transition, to be a star at the University of Florida, to come in as a rookie and really get a chance to make a difference with a young Heat team with Dwayne Wade, and then them saying, you know what? We've got Chris Bosh. We've got LeBron James. We've got guys, we're going to go in another direction. UD, you're off the bench, and he accepted that role. That makes a difference. And then you find someone like Norris Cole. Again, came into the NBA, had nothing but championship success. How hard do you think it must be for a young player to come in, and you walk in the locker room your first day, and you see Chris Bosh, and you see Dwayne Wade, and you see LeBron James? You can either be intimidated and terrified, or you can say, I'm going to spark the second unit. That's what Norris Cole did.
Mm-hmm. And going back to Birdman, I mean, like you said, just looking at him, he was one of those guys who stood out, all those tattoos and everything. So he appeared in 181 games for the Heat, and only 21 of those were starts. 20 of those were in one season.
Yes.
So he had that bench fuel, like I guess.
Yeah, I mean,
really...
you look at this. I mean, you even look at the pictures. You know, and you can talk about the body art all you want. And he had the mohawk for a while, and then sometimes he didn't. but he let you know he was there. And this is why a bench role works for some players. You don't worry about the fouls. You have 6 fouls, spend them all. You're not being asked to play 40 minutes a game. It's right here. Grab an ankle, grab an arm, grab the ball, go for it. That's what Birdman did, and he gave every ounce when he was on the floor. For years, the Heat said, this guy would work in our system. He's a worker. And you know what? Don't be intimidated by the looks. He is one of the nicest guys that I've run into in the NBA. I mean, he went through some contretemps earlier in his career, but then he really came on, and you could really see how much he helped. And you know what? It killed me that just for luxury tax relief, they had to let him go when they made that trade with Memphis, and I think they would have loved to have brought him back, but he was a real difference maker, and, well, I guess clearly the most colorful personality in the Heat's history.
Yeah, safe to say.
So we'll go on now to less colorful personalities, but still contributors. Number 4 on my list, I have Shane Battier. Look, anyone who saw the Heat during those playoffs and championships, Shane Battier in the corner for a three-pointer was money, as he was with his defensive work. He really played as a key bench contributor with those championship and finals teams, as did Mike Miller. I mean, you talk about the energy. He comes in, the hair was flowing for a while with that headband. He would lose a shoe and still run down the court and make a three-pointer because that's what Mike Miller does. He was that kind of boost. And a lot of people look at this other name and say, wait a minute, Antoine Walker, he started in the playoffs in 2006 when the Heat won the championship. Yes, he did, but he barely started during that season. And it was the regular season that helped fuel the championship run with his tippy-toe threes and everything he did. He's a guy to me who belongs on starters list, but also as a reserve.
Mm-hmm. And Mike Miller, like we mentioned earlier with Chris Anderson, he had 139 regular season appearances, and only 21 of those were starts. And yeah, like you said, he had that infectious energy. Again, hitting a shot without a shoe. Come on.
And that's what he was. It was the best of times. His emotion would lift the Heat. Remember, you're going to the NBA Finals 4 straight years. You need an emotional boost during the regular season, and that's what Mike Miller gave him. A lot of people forget he was the college roommate of Udonis Haslem. There was a history there already. No one had to teach Mike Miller the Heat culture. His best friend has been part of the Heat culture well before Mike Miller showed up, and you could just see from this video. Matter of fact, most of these shots, if you look at, he's on the floor, or he's exhausted, or he's doing something that shows you that he literally was an every last breath kind of player. And how interesting, he's wearing the same number that Bam Adebayo wears right now. Energy players. It's almost as if number 13 has been reserved for those kind of players. That's what Mike Miller did. You know what? When you're going to think back of your great fond Heat memories, it will always be of Mike Miller in motion. So I have him as number 2, as number 3. Number 1 on my list, though, you know, sometimes it comes down to one play and one moment in time. And to me, Ray Allen, for what he did, of course, in Game 6, end of regulation, 2013 NBA Finals against the San Antonio Spurs, hits the corner 3, he goes to overtime, they win the next game. He would wind up starting one playoff game only for the Heat. It was his work off the bench to have that kind of threat. I mean, how interesting we run this list on the show we talk about Wayne Ellington. He was Wayne Ellington, obviously Wayne Ellington to a Hall of Fame degree before Wayne Ellington, but this sort of was the start for the Heat. To have that three-point shooter come off the bench, to have someone that you could look at and you could see that he could always provide the boost. So you say to yourself, okay, we're down 6, we're down 9, we're down 12, we're down 15. It's a multiple of 3. That's the thing. You knew that Ray could shoot you back into a game. That's why I have him. To me, later in his career, he was the quintessential sixth man, a guy who made the shift from career starter, Seattle, Milwaukee, Boston. Boston didn't want to be a reserve, came to the Heat and realized, hey, that's what I could be. Closed his career in glorious fashion off the bench. Nothing better, of course, than that shot in Game 6.
Absolutely. Again, we always enjoy these lists. It's so much fun to look back on the Heat history as it is the 30th anniversary season. Make sure to go to sunsentinel.com to check out all of these lists. They're all there. But let's shift gears now and take a look ahead. So on this upcoming slate of games, what are you most looking at?
You know, in the NBA season, EmmaKate, there are trap games that when I get the schedule in July or August, I go, okay, that's a loss. So I will not be with the Heat when they go to Houston next Monday. I'm going to skip that game. Not because my jury duty begins the next day. No, because I want to be here, 1, to tape and Ask Ira Live, but 2, who put this schedule together? So let's review. The Heat on Sunday, home against Milwaukee. Monday played the Martin Luther King afternoon game in Chicago. Then we have the game against Milwaukee Wednesday night. Then the Heat go to Brooklyn Friday night. Then they go to Charlotte Saturday. So after that, they're coming home, of course, right? They go to Charlotte. No, they go to Houston. It makes no sense. Remember earlier in the season, the Heat had a West Coast trip, and they were playing L.A. and Phoenix and Golden State, and all of a sudden the league said, well, let's stop off in Detroit on the way home. Well, we know what happened in Detroit. It was one of their worst road losses. They were up big. They blew that lead. I don't get this scheduling. I don't get how you can put a team out on the road for 4 East Coast games, Midwest games, bring them through Charlotte, and then shoot them right out to Houston, whether James Harden is playing or not or Chris Paul is healthy. It just sets up as one of those games. It's a non-conference game. We spoke about how games count double on the schedule when you're playing in Milwaukee or you're playing in New York, a team you're battling with. I'm really curious to see how it sets up for the Heat. They've surprised me at times before. They shocked me with the victory in Toronto, with the game they played in Indiana on the second night of a back-to-back when James Johnson was suspended. If they pull this off in Houston next week, then I think we got to raise the ante on all the Heat's possibilities. That Rockets team has been playing well enough lately, and the fact of where it comes on this trip, I really wonder if Eric Spoelstra even says to himself, yeah, I'm going to put only so much into that. We're going to be home after that. That's the difference. To me, they call this in the NBA a scheduling loss. I think it'll be very interesting. I think any competitive play in that game next Monday will be a bonus.
And welcome back. I'm here in the studio. Ira is in chilly Milwaukee, but we're able to talk to him today, which is great because there's a ton going on. We actually have quite a few questions, Ira, if you're ready.
I am good to go. Hopefully you guys can hear me back in the studio.
Yes, we can. All right, so Brian in Fort Lauderdale asks, with the Cavaliers in desperate need of defense and a rim defender, timing could be everything. Would the Heat make a move for a certain lottery pick? Nets pick. And what players would Cleveland need to send to the Heat to make a trade like this work? Salivating at the possibilities. Maybe we'd have to add in Justice Winslow, which I'd hate to see, but this deal screams do it for both teams. What say you?
You know, it's interesting, EmmaKate, because obviously Cleveland's going through a rough patch. First of all, I don't believe that Cleveland in January or February is anything close to what we're going to see from Cleveland in March, April, and May. So there's no panic there. Beyond that, they have played their best basketball, at least offensively, with Kevin Love at center. So I'm not so sure that you're going to see Cleveland run out and get a $98 million center. And also, there's the other part of the equation. Let's say, just for argument's sake, that, okay, Cleveland's interested in Hassan Whiteside. The Heat would probably have to take back some bad contracts from Cleveland, likely Tristan Thompson, who would be a duplicating in the middle right there, players like J.R. Smith, Iman Shumpert, maybe Channing Frye. I'm not sure after the way the LeBron James thing played out that the Heat necessarily are getting on the phone with Cleveland and talking to Dan Gilbert with Mickey Arison on this end. So yes, you could say that Cleveland needs a little bit more deterrence, but I'm not so sure that Hassan Whiteside would be the direction they would go. They want the lane open for LeBron to play power forward, for their slashers, Isaiah Thomas, to get into the paint. But, man, I would love to be on that trade conversation if they did talk.
That would be an interesting one for sure. All right, Connor asks, who's a target they are looking at by the trade deadline?
You know, it is so early, EmmaKate. I know February 8th sounds like it's right around the corner, but when you look at the great landscape, those deals always get done on the 6th, the 7th, right at the deadline. So often we're told, okay, we're past the 3 p.m., 4 p.m. deadline, and you hear of other trades. So I think it's too far out. I got to be honest. We spoke at the top of today's show about Tyler Johnson and his ankle and Achilles injury. We know Dion Waiters is having season-ending surgery. I think the Heat have to reassess where they stand. And I know it sounds strange that a player who sounds so minimal, but if Rodney Magruder comes back from his preseason leg surgery, I think the Heat might just say, we have enough. We don't want to take on more salary. The only player I could see going out for the Heat, and we'll talk about this down the road, we spoke about it at the top of the show today, might be Wayne Ellington if the Heat simply feel they cannot, because of the luxury tax, afford him in the offseason. I think that's the kind of question I'm going to ask both the questioner and you, EmmaKate. Get back to me closer to February 8th.
Yeah, like you said, it seems close, but there's a lot more basketball to play before then. All right. Douglas asks, James Johnson is basically an energy guy and not a starter in this league. Gotta let the kids play. Bam Adebayo, Derrick Jones Jr. The Bulls pulled away in the second quarter when James Johnson came back in. I get it. They just paid him $60 million, but he's not a starter in this league.
Yeah, you know, that's a good question. I got to be honest with you. When they gave James Johnson that contract, I said to myself, based on what he did over the second half of last season, I had no real issue. I thought he was going to be a catalyst. He has not been very good this season, and I think he would be the first one to tell you. So I think what has to happen is this. Either James Johnson or Justice Winslow have to start playing well. If you get one of those two, I think you could survive. But I'm not one to criticize players during the first half of the season, but something has to change with James Johnson. He is feisty, he is active, he is aggressive, but he's simply not contributing in as many ways as he did last season. I think it's a reasonable point. I think they keep him a starter a little bit longer, but as we saw, they thrive with Kelly Olynyk starting. So I think there might be sort of a short time frame before Erik Spoelstra possibly goes in another direction.
All right. Keith asks, shouldn't the Heat have seen this coming with Hassan Whiteside's immaturity?
Yeah, I can't make the face, so thank you for making one for me. Look.
Hey, I know it's a little harsh, but.
I totally understand. And the thing is with Hassan Whiteside is when he is at his best, he is a dominating all-star level NBA center. And there are times he just floats through games. There are times we spoke about this, EmmaKate, before. You wish you could just sort of go up to him and shake him and saying, use these muscles of yours. And I think that's what's frustrating Erik Spoelstra also. Hassan has been back for 10 games since he missed third team with a bone bruise on the knee. In half of them, fully 5 games, he has not played at all in the fourth quarter. So I think there are reasonable questions to be asked. Part of it is Erik Spoelstra feeling comfortable enough. But yeah, I think part of it is on Hassan also. This is not the formative player growing up into an NBA player like he was early in his career with Sacramento, playing overseas and in the developmental league. The Heat expect more, and I think we as followers, as outsiders, should expect more as well. So yeah, I think there are times you might even catch me at side court making my own kind of face.
All right. So as it stands right now, it doesn't really look like the Heat are going to have a representative in the All-Star game, just with how the voting sits right now. But if they were to have one, who would your vote be for?
Well, I mean, it's going to be interesting because the votes, the fans' votes, the media votes, the players' votes are in. On Thursday, we'll find that out, who the starters are. Starting on Thursday, coaches will vote for the 7 reserves in each conference. Those will be announced next Tuesday. We spoke to Erik Spoelstra here in Milwaukee before the game against the Bucks, and he said if he had to give us one name, so I might as well steal from the coach, he said it would be Goran Dragic, based on his career body of work, based on what he's done this season. But Erik also was honest, and he said, look, we were on nobody's radar the first 6-8 weeks of the season based on how they played. I would make my vote for Goran over Josh Richardson, even with all the stuff I've said about Josh and how well he's playing, more for career body of work. I will say this, though, and it sounds odd, these next few games for the Heat, Wednesday in Milwaukee, Friday in Brooklyn, Saturday in Charlotte, they're meaningful. That's when the coaches will have the ballots in their hand to vote for their 7 reserves. If the Heat plays well in that stretch, I think it'll help the Heat. I think the Heat's best player next Tuesday to be announced as a reserve, if anyone is, would be Goran Dragic.
All right, well, I think we all hope we get one there at least. We'd love to see a Heat representative at the All-Star game this year. All right, we have time for one more question. So
Sure.
Ty in Miami asks, do your readers actually watch Justice Winslow play and see the many positive things he's doing on the floor?
You know, and I understand that. And you know what? Even Dave Hyde had a comment at sunsentinel.com the other day that if you were to reverse the draft positions of Josh Richardson and Justice Winslow and say Josh Richardson was the number 10 pick in 2015 and that Justice was the number 40 pick, I don't think anyone would have any issues. But there are the expectations of your team's most recent lottery pick or most recent top 10 pick of perhaps being a little bit more. Yes. Justice Winslow does a lot of productive little things. I'm not sure many teams draft players at number 10 to do little things. So again, step back for a while, sort of like Ted Ginn with the Dolphins, what he was expected to do here, what he did elsewhere in the NFL. I think it's the same thing with Justice Winslow. He does enough to help you. If you're going to ask me this, just like the question you asked before, can he become an all-star? I don't think he's shown that yet, and I think therein lies the frustration of so many Heat fans. They don't ever want to have the number 10 pick in the lottery again.
That's for sure. Ira, thank you so much for joining us from Milwaukee. We know you're busy, doing a lot of traveling. Hopefully we get to see you back in the Sunshine State soon and out of the cold. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll be back again next week.